Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, this is Joanna Oakey and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, in this episode, we chat with Jonathan J on all things acquisitions. Over the past 30 years, Jonathan has acquired and exited businesses in publishing, digital marketing, adult education, preschool education. You name it, he's done it. In fact, he's gone through 70 acquisitions and sales, which is a stunning number. So with Jonathan today, we're chatting through a whole range of things, why a person might acquire, how to find a good business, and Jonathan's top tips for anyone embarking on the acquisition journey. And of course, we also hear about some of his lessons learned along the way. Well, here we go with Jonathan J. Jonathan, welcome onto the podcast. It is fabulous to have you here on the Deal Room.
Well, thank you for having me. Good to speak to you.
Wonderful. Okay, now you have got such an interesting history. Why don't we just can you give us the 3-second overview of who you are, what your background is, and why you love business acquisition so much?
Sure. So I've never actually worked for anyone else. I've never actually had a job. I've always done my own thing. I dropped out of university when I was 19 years old. I first sold a business in 1999, so that's 24 years ago. First bought a business in 2006, which is I think about 17 years ago. And I bought and sold heading for 70 different businesses over the years. I've had some multi-million pound exits, multi-million pound acquisitions, lots of smaller ones as well. Some work, some don't. That's the name of the game, I guess, when you do that many. And I've had a lot of fun along the way.
What was your most fun acquisition then?
Oh, my most fun. A good question. Well, they're all interesting in different ways. I mean, some are a little bit frustrating. Anyone who thinks that you can buy a business with your eyes closed doesn't really understand how it works. I mean, it's typically a roller coaster along the way. And I suppose the fun or part of the fun comes from getting a great deal and negotiating a really good deal. Or I suppose at the end of the day, the most fun is always going to be when you have that successful exit at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, that's an interesting thing, getting a great deal on an acquisition, but then ultimately ending up with a business that you have no passion for, that you hate, that even if your intention for buying it to flip it, I can imagine there's probably not a hell of a lot of joy in the acquisitions, and unless you have some connection to the business. Is that your mode? Or tell us.
No, not really for me. No, it's I remember as a teenager that I wanted to be in business, but it didn't really matter to me what type of business it was. So the whole business concept is one that I love, but I wouldn't say that I really fall in love with any particular type of business, because that passion piece is really only relevant if you're turning up to the office every day and you're managing it. But I'm a terrible manager, a terrible operator, and I'm the last person you want turning up to the office every day. Now, I've done that, but I would never do it again.
And so your mode then is to buy and then sell quite quickly after acquisition, is it? Or what's your, if you don't stay in a business managing it, what's the approach?
But I've also held for a number of years. So the approach differs according to the to really what the circumstances are. So this is slightly different when you're an individual doing this. It's different to a private equity firm that has an investment thesis that says this is what we're going to do, and we've got 5 years, the length of the fund, in order to do it, and therefore we've got to do this in year one, this in year two, and so forth. you've got a lot more freedom as an individual, which is why business acquisition is for many people the new property investing, the new real estate investing, and it's a way of gaining some freedom, maybe freedom from corporate life, or growth. Because if you've got a business that's been doing $1 million a year for the last 3 or 4 years, and you're getting frustrated with it, and you can't see any way to get it up to $5 million a year or $10 million a year, then the fastest, most effective way is to buy another business, maybe one that's similar to the one that you already own, one that's complementary to the one that you already own, or maybe part of your supply chain. And then you can make those big leaps very, very quickly, rather than getting frustrated by organic growth, which is running more Facebook advertising, hiring more salespeople, taking 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Every year is going to get better, and quite often it doesn't. So this gives you that predictable growth. And my clients who are buying businesses to grow their existing business all wish they'd done it a decade ago.
It's funny that you say that, because that does seem to be the traditional comment from people who've bought a business to achieve that growth through acquisition, as opposed to the organic, slow growth. So commonly say, I just wish I had have discovered this, all of these years ago, when I was spending all of that time on that organic growth. But what's the, one thing our listeners may not know is that you run a membership. I think it's a membership, an academy for people who are looking to buy businesses. Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm based in the UK, but we've got clients all around the world, a growing number in Australia, Canada, North America, Scandinavia, interestingly, and I'm very popular in the Netherlands. Now, I don't know how that happened. I'm very popular in the Netherlands, and of course a lot in the UK. And we run training programs that can be accessed internationally through the power of video conferencing and Zoom. Which actually pre-COVID, everything we did was in the UK, and COVID forced us to be a little bit more creative with our support and our delivery, which meant that we could go wider afield. And so we help people, especially with their first acquisition, which is always going to be the toughest. That's the steepest learning curve. So we hold people's hands through that first deal and just make sure that they don't make any silly mistakes, which usually are expensive. Silly mistakes in business are expensive mistakes usually.
Well, which I'm going to ask you about in a moment, because of course that's also where we see the role of a lawyer to help avoid mistakes. But I bet you've got a few there if you've gone through 70 acquisitions. I think you were telling me at one point.
Acquisitions and sales, yeah.
Acquisitions and sales. Got it. So of the people that you deal with who are looking to buy businesses, what would you say the split is between people who are looking to, there's that whole buy a job market or get out of a career market. I see a lot of people coming out of, have been employed for a long period of time, and then suddenly, not suddenly, but one day they decide I want to take charge of my own destiny. And so they're either I'll start a business, I'll buy a business, decide to buy a business, which I think is the superior choice out of the two. Maybe we'll talk about that in a moment. But you've got that sort of buyer versus your buyer who has got their own business but is looking at acquisition as a way to grow their existing business. In terms of the people that you deal with, what is the split between the two? Oh,
I don't know precisely, but it feels about 50-50. So we have people leaving corporate life who, I can think of a very quick example. A client of mine in the UK worked for DHL, the parcel delivery service, and he left a well-paid job there with the intention of buying a business to swap his salaried income with dividends, and he was earning £190,000 a year, and that was his goal. He wanted to make that amount of profit that he could take from the business. His first acquisition cost him £10 million, which I think is about $20 million dollars at the current exchange rate, and all of it was funded. It was none of his own money, and the business now has annual revenues of £6 million, about $12 million, and is making £3 million annual profit, $6 million annual profit. So I think he's swapped his income quite nicely. And then we've got people who've grown their business by leaps and bounds, who got stuck in a bit of a rut, with that $500,000 a year business, not quite knowing how to get to the next level, and then they change everything with the very first acquisition. So I see both sides. I see the people leaving corporate life, and I see the people with their existing business.
And I mean, it's a huge move, I guess, for someone to leave a world of being an employee and then move into being a business owner. There's a whole heap of risks, but also opportunities. What are the top tips that you think are most important for someone who hasn't had experience in business when coming into, obviously we've got the whole, the method of acquisition and how to identify the right target and all of those sorts of things, but then they're in the business and they've got to run it somehow and be aware of, I guess the risks of running a business so that they don't lose the asset that they've acquired. What are some of the top, things that you think are important?
So first of all, I'd never tell anyone to quit their job and buy a business. You can buy a business evenings and weekends. Buying a business is not a full-time process. At one point, I had 7 on the go at the same time, and I still had hours in my day where I had nothing to do. So buying a business can be done while you're working for someone else. The second thing is you buy a business that's sufficiently large enough to have a second-tier management team. So when the owner leaves, which typically they do when they sell, not always, but mostly they do, then the business continues operating as it were when the owner was there, because the last thing you want to be doing is running the business. You're not looking for another job, and you're absolutely right. Someone with no business experience suddenly running a business, well, the chances of that being successful are probably quite slim. But if you're coming in as an investor rather than a manager or an operator, then life just carries on as usual. Now, your success level increases again if the seller is staying with the business in some sort of role for a period of time, and then your success increases to a whole new level if the future success of the business that's been sold is tied to the amount of money that the seller receives for it. Therefore, they have a vested interest in helping you make sure that it continues to be successful. And finally, the one thing that really makes a difference is buying the right business. And the right business is one that is solid, profitable, established, reliable. You do not want to be buying a business that is stressed or distressed in some way, because turnarounds might make you feel like a hero. We bought this business that was on its knees and it was collapsing and failing, and then we made it into this huge success story. Look how clever we are. Well, we've all read those stories, but they actually don't happen very often. Usually the turnaround fails. So if you buy an established, profitable business with a management team, with the owner tied in for a period of time and having their future income linked to the future success of the business, then you're hedging your bets at all times. So that makes your level of success go sky high.
Love it. Okay. I want to hear about the lessons learned. I bet there are a few of those along the way. What do you think are the biggest lessons that you've learned from all of your experiences in buying and selling?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. I always say to my clients, I've made all the mistakes so that you don't have to. I've done them all. Sometimes more than once. That's great when you make a mistake more than once. You go, oh yes, I've made that mistake already. I guess it depends what you want to do. So I've got a number of clients, quite a few actually, a growing number, that are interested in buying multiple businesses and creating a far larger entity rather than just buying one company. And the mistakes that people often make, that I've also made myself, is that you underestimate how much working capital is required for a growing business, and you start the finance raising process for growth capital way too late, because it always takes longer than you think it's going to take. So raising money for a growing group early is very important. The second mistake that people make is they think that they are the most important person in the company as the ultimate beneficial owner. They're not. The CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, is the most important person in the company, because without that CFO or finance director, whichever terminology you want to use, you can't do several things. You can't raise the money because you don't have the management accounts and the forecasts and that robust financial reporting that's required to raise the money. You'll sell your business for less for exactly the same reason. And the last thing you want is to have surprises when you've got a growing business. If you've got a business that's doing tens of millions of dollars of annual revenue, the last thing you want is to suddenly discover that during the summer period or during the Christmas period, you haven't got enough cash, but you've still got the same overheads. So having that tight control of the money is very, very important. Interestingly, some of my clients, since I've been emphasizing this with them, have gone back to their current finance directors and asked a few questions. And on one notable occasion, the finance director just didn't turn up for work the next morning because he discovered that he'd been found out. So, just because someone has that job title and that CV doesn't necessarily mean they're good at the job. But without that finance director in place, that CFO, you've got yourself a problem somewhere in the future. You just don't know yet that you've got that problem, but you will have.
Love it. Okay, wonderful. And so, what would you say in reflecting on, your deals or maybe the deals of your clients? What is one of the most successful acquisitions you've seen, and why?
It's not about a specific acquisition that's successful. The attributes of a successful acquisition are one where there's lots of different attributes. You can't always get them in the same deal, but buying an asset below market value is always good, because you win on day one. You don't have to do anything particularly clever, and you've got yourself a great deal from the start. And that comes from finding a sufficiently motivated seller and being able to negotiate and understand how the process and the system works. And therefore, if you can buy a $1 million asset for $500,000, sometimes people say, well, why would anyone sell for less than what it's worth? Well, you're assuming that the number one motivation for selling is money. Well, if you've got an established profitable business that the owner has had for, let's say, 20 years, they've made their money over that 20-year period, and they're now ready for retirement. Maybe ill health is playing a part, and it's now just about passing the business over to someone else. Sure, being compensated financially for that, but it's not all about that sort of big payday at the end, because they've done well over the years. What I've always found, just as an aside, is that the people who want the crazy valuations for their business are the people with the least valuable businesses, because their way of thinking is, I haven't made any money for the last 10 years, therefore I've got to make the money when I sell the business. Rather than, I've done really well over the last 10 years, it's not all about money now, it's about lifestyle, health, retirement, spending time with the grandchildren, and so forth. So without a doubt, the most successful acquisitions are one where you can win on day one. You've effectively, you've got something on day one that's worth more than what you paid for it.
Love it. We have, I guess, in Australia, so the sort of businesses I can hear you talking about as being, those great acquisition targets, the businesses that are profitable, that are run under management, actually in Australia are some of the hardest businesses to find as a buyer, because they're the most sought after businesses by buyers here in Australia. In Australia, there's this glut of businesses on the market that are the opposite. So businesses either that aren't making profit, or businesses that are dependent on the owner. And I know, I've listened to some of your material. I know you have some different creative ways of viewing various things. But what's your approach to dealing with a market that might have a lack of supply of this sort of type of quality business that is the ideal business to buy, and a massive glut of these other businesses that are, obviously on the face of them not ideal, but haven't got buyers at the moment?
Yeah, well, you're I believe, approaching this from what is advertised for sale. So you're saying that the majority of the business advertised for sale aren't making very much money. They're owner dependent. They're not the best quality businesses. We ignore those completely. We don't look at businesses that are being advertised for sale because, number one, the reasons that you said. Number two, there are going to be several people interested in any one business at any time, which pushes the price up unrealistically. So we go off market. So we go to businesses that are not advertised for sale. So of course we don't know whether the owner has thought about selling. I mean, every owner does. I mean, anyone who owns a business thinks about selling, at least once a year. Usually they think about selling when they've had a really bad week, bad month, someone's quit on them, this has happened, that's happened, it's that perfect storm. They think, why am I doing this? I've done this for 15 years, I've had enough of this. So they're the sort of people that you want to be talking to. So how do we find them? Well, we can't read their minds. We don't know what they're thinking. So we have to do some outreach that approaches lots of owners in order for the people who were thinking that particular day, I've had enough of this. Why am I doing this crazy thing? Why I'm too old for this. We want to be talking to those people. So we completely ignore everything that's on the market. Definitely for a first-time buyer, there is certainly something to be said for using business brokers later on in the search process. But as a first-time buyer, it's not recommended.
Wonderful. Well, look, do you have any parting tips for our listeners, Jonathan, who may be sitting there thinking, I love this idea of acquisition, don't know if it's for me? Yeah,
sure. The secret to success is following a system. It's not making it up as you go along and trying to cobble together information from the internet and trying to make sense of it all. It's about following a process that's tried and trusted, proven to work, that other people have followed, and that the process drives the acquisition. I've never seen anyone be successful just making it up as they go along and hoping that it's going to work out. Hope is not a great business strategy.
Brilliant. Love it. How can our listeners find out more, Jonathan, if they want to connect with you or listen to more of the content that you have in this area?
Sure. So three ways. I have a podcast too called Business Buying Strategies. I think we're up to about 250 30-minute episodes. So going back five years of that. I've got a YouTube channel, Jonathan J, on YouTube. Got about 200 videos on there, all about business buying. The most interesting ones are the ones where, well, in my opinion, the most interesting ones are the ones where I'm interviewing my clients about the deals that they've done. And people can connect with me on LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn. There's a few people with a similar name, so find someone who looks like me and send me a connection request, and be happy to answer any questions on LinkedIn.
Love it. Look, Jonathan, just a huge thank you for coming onto the podcast today. Look, it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me, Joanna.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Deal Room podcast. We hope you're now primed for your next deal with these pointers and have enjoyed these fascinating insights. Now, if you'd like more information about this topic, then head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com. dealroom.com, where you'll be able to download a transcript of this episode, as well as access any contact details and any other additional information we referred to in today's podcast. Now, if you'd like to get in contact with our guests today and the services they offer, you can go ahead and check out our show notes for a link right through to them and their details. You can also book in directly with our legal eagles at Aspect Legal if you'd like to soundboard your next steps, discuss a legal question, or find out more how we can assist, whether that's with buying or selling a business, or perhaps somewhere in between. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the Deal Room podcast on your favourite podcast player to get notifications whenever a new episode is out. We'd also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and rating if you're already one of our subscribers, or even if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time. Every review helps our team produce valuable content for you. Well, thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time. Aspect Legal has a number of great services that help businesses prepare for a sale or acquisition, to help them prepare in advance and to get transaction ready. We've also got a range of services to help guide businesses through the sale and acquisitions process. We work with clients both big and small and have different types of services depending on size and complexity. We provide a free consultation to discuss your proposed sale or acquisition. So see our show notes on how to book a time to speak with us, or head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.